Do you feel that? Do you feel that? Oh, shit.
I love that so much every time. I love that
good.
so much. Okay, everybody. Yes, I spelled friendly wrong. Woo! That'll be changed. That won't be even relevant to the people watching this tomorrow. But right now, the title is spelled wrong, and we don't care. Hayden, you are here with me. Thank you for being here with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're gonna have a fun chat today. Would you like to? Do you want to give? So this is kind of just funny that this is happening. Like this is a very random way for a debate to come together. For those of you who haven't read the title yet, Hayden and I are each going to destroy one another with facts and logic. It's going to be a good time. But no, so I mean, how did this? What's your? What are your goals tonight? How did this all happen? Yeah, just talk to me here.
Sure. Yeah. So funny enough, must have been 2 or 3 weeks ago.
I think it was 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Your Book of Mormon little marathon with Tracy.
Yeah.
I can't remember her name. Tracy.
Yeah, it was Tracy.
It popped up on my YouTube recommended. And so I clicked on it. It said live. So I'm like, oh, cool. They're awesome. And I didn't know if you were a Latter-day Saint. I didn't know who you were at all. I just clicked on it. And I think I quickly realized that you were an ex-member or at least a critic of the church in some way.
Yeah.
So I started commenting on your live section and I said something provocative. I can't remember exactly what it was.
I could pull. Let me think. I could pull it up.
Something about.
It was like, what is this? An echo chamber or something?
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
yeah. Is this an echo chamber?
That was kind of witty and good.
Yeah. Well, and I did it because I've commented on videos before, not live most of the time, and I feel like most of my comments get looked over because they're more mundane or
they're polite.
Yeah, polite, and and that's fine. And I do that most often, but for some reason I was like, no, I want to talk to these guys. So let's poke them just a little bit, and it worked. Yeah, and you guys got me on live, and my camera wasn't working that night. I was in my car actually, my iPhone wasn't working. But anyway, so we just decided we talked for 30 minutes, maybe. I can't remember.
I think we cut it off right at about 15.
Okay, so it was pretty short.
It was already like almost an hour of live stream when we got you the link, and I like for those watching right now, this is going to be an hour. We're not going to go that long, but because both of us kind of like shorter, more concise, if we want to call it a debate, but it's not really a debate. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
And I think we could always do another one if it's interesting, or maybe not, if not.
Yeah.
But we started talking, and we quickly realized, I mean, people watching realized there's just so much to talk about. We didn't have enough time. So we just figured, hey, let's figure up a new time to talk about it. You suggested talking about morality, which I think for an atheist and a theist is the perfect topic an interesting topic. We won't agree on a whole lot, which will be fun, I think.
Well, so I think interestingly, you and I will probably agree on all of the actual morals that we think we should live by. I think we're just going to disagree on how we think we arrive at those. That's my prediction for tonight, because I think you and I probably have very similar ideas of what it means to be a good person, how we should treat those around us.
We were shaped by the Western world and Western thought. So
exactly. So I actually think that we're going to probably agree on 90% of this. So anybody who's like, hey, let's watch, like, there are so many of these like YouTube live theist debate shows, and I promised myself I would never become one of those, and now here I am I'm just doing one, but I'm not gonna it's not gonna be an angry debate. My goal here, because I think that you and I, like I said, I think we're gonna agree on a lot. I would love it if you could help me make my argument stronger, and if I could help you make your argument stronger. I just want to help you build the best version of your argument, and I hope that you do the same for me. And then everybody watching this will leave with a better perspective. Those who are predisposed to think that theists are annoying or cringy or whatever will be like, actually, that Hayden guy was pretty awesome. I liked him. And those who think that atheists are usually like asshole, like
they can come away with a new perception.
They can come away with a new perception as well. So that's what I'm hoping to get out of tonight. I think it'll be fun. And yeah, so like you said, we're going to talk about morality tonight. So I guess to get started here, would you say, how would you want to frame, I guess, the claim that you're making here about morality? Do you believe that morality is objective? I guess one quick thing before we get into that question, we kind of ended our little short debate last time, just kind of landing on the God question and so we started with like, can we talk about Mormonism? Well, there are a whole bunch of assumptions that are underneath Mormonism that we probably don't agree on. So could we talk about those assumptions and maybe get those straightened out? And then it was like, okay, well, one of those assumptions is whether or not a God exists at all. And we kind of sat around there for a while. And I guess I'm interested. We talked a little bit about why, like what your, how would we say this? What your arguments for like the existence of God would be, or what you think is a compelling line of reasoning. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
And we danced around there for a little bit. And then at the end, you said something like, well, but, atheists are still acting on faith. And, like there's objective morality through theism or something along those lines. I want you to correct everything that I'm saying here.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what I mentioned about morality.
Yeah.
But maybe we should define morality.
Yeah, let's do it.
Just define common ground, right? And build off of there. And then we'll see kind of where we diverge, because we will eventually.
Yeah.
I would say, and tell me if you agree or disagree with this, I would say morality is the principles by which we know what we ought or ought not to do based on a standard or a goal.
Yeah.
And we would disagree on that standard or goal. And maybe that's, I don't know, would you agree with that? Or does that fit how you would define it?
Yeah. And I love the way that you throw the word ought in there. We're getting this like good is ought language from, now I'm forgetting the Scottish philosopher's name, but yeah.
I don't know. Good question.
I know his name. It's somebody's, anyway, it doesn't matter. I'll remember it. But yeah. So yeah, what we ought to do depending on the goal that we're aiming at, or kind of a lot of this is what we've been told from, like, culturally, what we've been told we should pursue or not pursue. Like a good example that I think we would both agree is good moral behavior, because there's no such thing, like everything in my opinion is moral behavior. There are very, very few things. Thank you, Scott. It is David Hume. Yeah, it was Hume's guillotine. That's what I was trying to remember. But yeah, so there is
you said everything is moral behavior.
Everything is moral behavior. I think there are very few, like what you wake up and decide to get dressed in probably isn't moral behavior, but you're either doing something that's for your own good and for the good of those around you and more broadly for society, or you're doing something that could be bad for you and on a larger scale could be bad for society all around you. And there's very few things I would say that probably aren't good moral or bad moral. That's just maybe a good way to frame this whole thing.
Sure. And I do have a question about that. And this is where the conversation is destined to go.
Yeah.
How do you determine what is good and what is bad?
Right. Yeah. So we could get into, and I struggle with this one all the time. So there's the intent behind the action, and then there are the consequences of the action. Right. And I fall heavily on, it was Kant's proposal that an action is good because it is good, right? It's an action is good if you would want to walk outside every day and everybody in your society is doing that. If you would be happy if that were the case, then that's a good behavior. So like think about paying a speeding ticket. So if you think, well, it's good for me to save this money and not pay my speeding ticket, well, that doesn't really pass Kant's test, because you wouldn't want everybody to do that, because then what happens if we're not all funding, we're all defaulting on our speeding tickets, then we're doing something that's detrimental to society. We're essentially robbing the future to feed the present. And so that would be a good place to start. I like that a lot. I think that can
you say it one more time? Kant's, can you summarize that so I can?
Yeah. So he called it it was his imperative. It was his, what was it? It's so hard to remember things on live streams. You know what I mean? You have all this information in your head. You've been thinking about it all day, and then it was Kant's moral imperative. There it goes. But so an action is good if you would be happy if everybody else were doing that thing, and an action is bad if you would not be happy if everybody else were not doing that thing.
Okay.
Now,
so is it
happy
go ahead.
is a tricky word there.
Yeah. Okay.
It's probably better to say, would it be good for everybody in the society that I'm sharing this culture with if I did this thing and if everybody else did this thing? If the answer is yes, then it's a moral behavior.
It's a moral good.
Yeah, exactly. It's a moral good. Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay. So here's some of my thoughts on that.
Yeah.
To define a moral good, I'm not sure we can use the word good to describe it. Right. Otherwise, the definition is meaningless. So so let's just assume that. Well, I don't know. How would you define good if that's the standard?
Let's see. Pushes more people down the path of well-being.
Okay.
More people. So we're kind of getting a little consequentialist here, but I'm trying to stay away from that a little bit, because there are parts of consequentialism that I don't agree with. More or less beneficial. So help me make this as strong as possible, Hayden.
Sure. So
we're focusing on well-being, and we're trying to say this is something that promotes well-being in our society for more people. Is that less circular reasoning?
Yes, I think it is. Now, what I would say is, and one of the holes I see in this is the word beneficial and the word good. They're value claims, right?
Right.
They're words that don't mean anything unless we give them to them. For example, if I was to say, well, that which is good is that which benefits the most amount of people in my society,
right? Well,
what if and here's one of the issues I think you're going to run into, and we can kind of address how maybe to work with this.
Yeah.
What if the most beneficial thing to do is to enslave, John next door and make him do all of our taxes for free, and we forced him by gunpoint? That would be pretty beneficial for all of us.
Yeah.
But so is that a moral good, right? And so I think there's a little bit of a crossroads of, if that's how we want to define it, then we're going to run into some issues regarding the value of the individual versus the value of the group, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I mean, so that's I like that pushback. It's necessary pushback. There has to be something that says, and I mean, this is where the dignity of like the human person. I mean, Jefferson said it was self-evident, but then he also said that it's self-evident that these are given to us from a creator. So it's tricky language purely from forming an argument standpoint. It's hard to like grant that there is, how do I want to say this? Because to say that a human being is valuable because a human being is valuable is obviously circular reasoning.
Right. From a theist, at least I would say from a Latter-day Saint perspective, because I know not all religions believe this.
Right.
Our kind of safety net on that concept, that kind of saves us, if you will, is we would say all people are valuable because they're children of God. Like that's the inherent worth in that. And that, that may only go so far from a secular point of view. So I don't know how, if you want to push back on that or whatever, but like what gives us our value is our innate nature, is what we would say.
Right. And I actually don't have a problem with that. I somewhat agree with that. I would maybe say, you know, we are if you want to say we're the most conscious, we're the most developed that we know of species on Earth, and with great power comes great responsibility, to quote Stan Lee. But I honestly think that those are very similar arguments to say we're endowed with this value that our creator has in us, or to say, well, we're the most highly developed organisms, and so we should be stewards for ourselves and those around us. And does that mean that we have to create our own values sometimes? I think it does. But I see us starting from a similar place. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I can see that. You said we should be good stewards.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
So think about this. So there's this argument in environmentalism and conservationalism. And environmentalism is we need to save the planet from us. And conservationalism is we need to take good care of the thing that's taking care of us because it benefits us to take care of it. Okay. And so this is the gardener who doesn't exploit his garden because he needs it again. So it's forced altruism. It's I'm going to do what's best for you because selfishly it's also best for me. Does that make sense? And so
it's kind of like the principle of sacrifice, like a mom sacrificing her time and sweat, blood, and tears for her children.
Exactly.
Is not good for her maybe in the short term, but in the long term, it actually is good for her.
Right. And so that's what I would say to that. The whole maybe I threw in some should language that was, eating a couple assumptions that I was ahead of, but that's the way that I would explain that.
Okay. Well, maybe we need to back up. Would you say, because I would approach morality from an objective standpoint or claim that it's an objective, right?
Okay.
That it's regardless of how we perceive reality, that there is, unless I'm deceived in some way, that reality itself has a moral framework that we work within. And so I would call that objective. It's outside of us.
Okay.
And I assume, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you would say that morality does not exist outside our minds, that it's a human concept. I assume that a framework that we work with to help propagate our genes, or help me understand kind of where you come from.
That's actually not a bad way to say it. I know some people might be, I don't know why they would, but I'm sure some people will disagree with that, but I actually don't have much of a problem with that. This is what I struggle with on the objective side of things is when people say there's an objective moral framework outside of us, is that just referring to there's a higher being who essentially saying is because I told you so? Is that can you spell this out for me? Because this is what I struggle with the most is if there, so I don't think it's possible for me to say there's such thing as an objective morality. But I don't think it's possible for theists to say that either. Sure.
And I can understand why. How I would say it, though, is Latter-day Saints, we would reject what some would call divine command theory, which is, because something is good because God says it's good. Okay. Right. We would say that reality and morality exist outside of God. Okay. Which a lot of Christians would say we're being heretical, right? They would say no, because God says it, or because God is that's the standard of good. Mm-hmm. We would say no, that God is bound by law. Mm-hmm. And when we say law, some may say eternal law, divine law. It's outside and in a way predates God. Okay. In a weird way, because we also believe God is eternal. But that being said, right, and there's different, we don't have to get into nature of God, but there's different camps within the LDS movement that, so some believe that God was once a man and that he was just like you and me, and others believe that he has been God forever in the way, and that he condescended and then he came back. There's a whole lot of Blake Ostler. If you know him or you've heard of him, he talks a lot about that in his series on Mormonism, on Mormon thought.
I actually haven't heard of him.
Yeah, and he's on Facebook. He's pretty active.
Okay.
He's done some interviews with Jacob Hansen.
Okay.
I've been able to sit on one of those interviews. So pretty smart guy, but he kind of represents the eternal God standpoint. And I would personally take more so the God was once a man.
Okay.
So that aside, that's kind of a little tangent, but
yeah,
instead of saying that, what is good is what God says, kind of, I would argue that God is God because he's in perfect alignment with that eternal law, or with reality is what I would call it.
Okay.
And so if we look to him, we can know what that eternal law is, but it doesn't originate from him.
Okay.
He's kind of our, he's our access to it, but it's outside of him.
Okay.
So I don't know if that answers your question about what is good and if God says it. We would deny that. Just like for example, if God told me to, I don't know, I don't want to get you censored on YouTube, do something horrible.
Yeah.
Would I be able to do that and have it be good just because he told me to do it? I would say no.
Okay.
Now, I do believe there are instances where God can command someone to do something that some people may say is evil, but I wouldn't consider it to be evil based on the circumstances or based on the principle.
Okay.
I hope that makes sense. I know it's kind of a little ramble, but
no, that is helpful. I was going to ask you, if it didn't come up at some point, the famous old question: are things good because God commands them, or does God command things that are good? And my thought with that, because it sounds like you and I had similar, like Mormon me and current you had similar thoughts on that particular question, where, well, God is instituting rules that were kind of passed down to him, and he's just executing the plan the way that it's been
given to him
and explained to him and shown to be like the blueprint,
that's my current belief at this point.
Okay. Yeah. There's the thing that started to noodle my brain on that one was when I read the happiness letter. There's a specific portion in it where Joseph Smith says to Nancy Rigdon, there are some things that God will command that are moral in one instance that aren't moral in another instance. Which makes me think that at least Joseph Smith's view of God was the other way around, that something is moral because he commands it that way.
And my pushback to that would be kind of what I said. I think there are moral principles that govern how God responds to us. So let me kind of give kind of an insight to this.
Yeah.
I would say that, so let's assume that God the Father, for just a moment, pretend you believe with me that God the Father lived on another planet. Let's say he was doing a podcast, just like he was just the Mormon guy or whatever. I would say, though, that we don't really know what that world would be like or the any details whatsoever, because of the idea of moral agency, right? If God puts an Adam and Eve on a planet, if you will, and he lets them propagate the world, there's not one way it could go. In other words, because of agency, people get to choose what they can do. So for example, like Adam and Eve, on this planet or whatever, let's say there's another planet salvation going on right now or whatever, it's kind of out in the ether. But if they had a son or two sons named Cain and Abel, in every instance, is Cain going to kill Abel? I don't believe so.
Okay.
I don't think that there's any reason to believe that.
Yeah.
And there's maybe not even any reason to believe that each Adam and Eve, if there are multiple, which our scriptures say that there are in the Pearl Great Price, there's not even necessarily evidence to say that each one of them partook of the fruit. And you've seen the LDS Temple Endowment, which we won't get into probably, but Satan talking about doing that, which has been done in other worlds, right? Talking about maybe this has happened. So from a Latter-day Saint perspective, we don't know exactly what's happening on other planets. So because of that, there cannot be set commandments for every single plan if there are multiple plans happening at the same time or one after another, because people have their agency. Like, for example, from a Latter-day Saint perspective, the law of Moses, we would say, was given to the Israelites because they rejected the higher law, right? I'm of the opinion that it was possible for them to accept the higher law, but they chose to reject it. And so they got this strict 611 commandments from God, but those commandments were based off of certain principles. And it's not the commandments that are eternal, because we don't live the Mosaic law anymore, right? No,
Right.
you know, and this is one of the points where a lot of mainstream Christians will look at LDS and say, "Yo, your God is changing. He changes all the time. He changes race in the priesthood and plural marriage. He's changing."
Yeah.
And my response is, well, do you still live the Mosaic law? Like, didn't your God also change his mind on these laws? So my point is, bringing it back to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That commandments from God, you know, I don't know the happiness letter, maybe even as well as you do. I read it a long time ago, but it's been years and years.
When Joseph, an interesting read. Yeah.
Yeah. When Joseph is saying, you know, maybe right in this instance and wrong in another, I think it's because it's based off of principles rather than the actual commandments themselves.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I don't know if you're.
It makes sense. I mean, I can relate to what you're describing as somebody who says, like, what would you say? So, like, there are certain behaviors that serve the purpose that you're aiming at in some instances, depending on the context, and don't serve the purposes that you're aiming at in other contexts. And so that could be like, is God going to be angry with a little boy who steals food to like go survive? Versus, is God going to be angry at somebody who had the money to pay and for just stole because, right? So, and I think the God that I believed in would have been fine with the former example and not with the latter example. And it seems like you are kind of saying something similar.
Yes, I can't say, and I appreciate you kind of laying that out. That makes it more succinct than even I could say it, which is part of this. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, that's why we're doing this.
Yeah, and I hope I can do the same for you. I would say that I lean more towards yes, that there are instances where a moral wrong can actually be, I don't know if we want to use the word excused or permitted, maybe by God.
Yeah.
The one example that I remember in the Old Testament, right? Because people will often point, and I don't know, Scott Ashby, I'm looking at his comment about slavery.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is what he's right. Because in the New Testament, at least in the New Testament, and probably actually in the Old Testament more so, there's talk about slavery and about minding your master. And there's debate on what that slavery was compared to, like, you know, United States, like early United States slavery. Yeah. A lot of people would say that slavery in the Bible is indentured servitude, where they're choosing to be a slave to pay off a debt or something like that. I'm not an expert on that, so I don't really necessarily feel qualified to speak on that in regards to the Bible. But here's what I was going to say before. The one example I can think of in the Bible is when, I think it's Abraham, where God instructs Abraham to lie, and to have him lie to, I can't remember what city they're in. I'll have to look it up after. Somebody can correct me in the comments. Where God tells him to lie to say that his wife is actually his sister, so that the people of this town he's entering won't try to assault her. And so that's like, okay, God just told him to lie, but the scriptures say God can't lie. Right. So why is he, can we, so there's a conundrum there.
Yeah.
But an example like that kind of leads me to what you said, right? Are there instances, and maybe what Joseph said in the letter, are there instances where lying may be permitted, or a moral wrong may be permitted in some instances? I lean towards yes, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. See, and
that's a slippery slope, I think.
It is a slippery slope. And because you're getting very close to saying, like, it's not the rules that you're following, it's the guiding principle, but now it's starting to sound like it just matters if it's God telling you to do it or not, a little bit. And it's also a little bit, it's starting to sound like maybe this whole like objective morality thing is being more difficult to define, because if there are excuses or reasons why behavior that that is immoral is permitted in certain situations, then it's becoming less and less objective, right?
Yes,
and unless we want to zoom way back out. So this is the best. I think Andrew Clavin said this. This was the smartest way that I've ever heard it defined. Have you read Crime and Punishment?
No, I have not.
Okay, that's a great book. That's a separate thing. But it's this question right here. He said there can only be a good and a bad if there exists a spectrum where there is an ultimate good and an ultimate bad.
Sure.
There can, and I think that's the moral framework that you're talking about. That's the scale, the sliding scale. But and so the point here is only if there is an absolute 100% good that exists can we even entertain the idea that there's something that exists as 75% or an 80% or a 90%, because all of that exists in context of the scale.
Right.
And so
I would agree with that.
And so my perspective on that is, even if there is a God out there, every person who believes in God is going to believe in a God who gives different commandments and excuses different types of behavior. And since none of us can pull out our, like, I don't know, our phones or whatever and say, like, no, he said this, here are the messages, you know what I mean? Like, he said to do this. This is the objective thing. I think it's hard to say. We're just in an earthly debate. It's just this theist says that his God says that these things are okay and that these things aren't. And this other theist agrees with 90% of it and not with the other 10%. And I'm great with that, by the way, because I think that we all mostly agree on the important stuff anyways. And so I'm like, hey, as long as we're not doing the 10 things that we all agree are bad, then it's fine, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway,
and,
I just spit a lot at you. So
no, it's good. And I've done the same. I'm sorry. Sometimes I'm a little long-winded.
No, you're good.
So I would agree that there's no way to prove an objective morality. I would only say that from a theist, I'll just say from a Latter-day Saint point of view, that we would call it objective. Here's what I mean by objective. I don't mean that I can show and prove it to you. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying I'm professing a standard outside of myself or outside of the human mind, I would call it.
Okay.
And I think that an atheist wouldn't be able to and wouldn't want to do that. That wouldn't make much sense to them, right? Morality exists within the human mind, I think, of an atheist. Would you agree with that?
There's a little bit of interplay here. I would 90% agree with that. But so there's something called, how do I want to present this? There are objective truths and there are subjective truths and there are intersubjective truths. Have you heard of intersubjective?
Intersubjective truth.
Intersubjective truths. I should have brought water up here. So an intersubjective truth is something that is true because enough people are buying into it. So money is we give it the value that it has, and so it has the value. And it would take more if one guy says, "I'm not buying this money shit, man." I don't think it has the value.
That wouldn't do anything to our society.
Wouldn't do anything to our society. But if enough people said, "I don't buy this money," then that would be a weird thing to say. But
this system of money.
Yeah. Like I'm not buying this money stuff anymore. Like it's not a thing. It has no value. It's a construct. You know what I mean? Then it would lose its value. And so I think that morality exists somewhere there where that is kind of outside of the human mind, but it's not really. But it's part of a broader thing that we're all agreeing on. And it's like a bunch of players go out to a basketball court, and they know what the rules are. And so they can play and they can do cool things within the context that they've all agreed to. And that's society. Society is a bunch of people who are like, okay, we know what the rules are because if we break the rules, we get fined, we go to jail, we do all of this. Like, we can only play the game and win at our lives and aim towards our goal. And I think in this case, probably everybody has a different goal, although they're very similar. But it's I think that this is the scale. It's the thing that society agrees to. They're the rules of the game. And does that exist inside or outside of the human mind? I think it's a collective intersubjective thing. And I don't know. I can't prove
Sure.
that. Just like
Sure.
you know what I mean? So
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back and let's focus a little bit on an atheistic worldview. So you're talking about, and I kind of want to dig on this a little bit to figure out how we can strengthen it. Like you said that, there, as long as we're not doing the 10 things that we all agree are really horrible, I would assume, you're talking about sexual assault, you're talking about murder, of innocent people, or, there's these few horrible things that we would say, generally speaking, we should never do them.
Right.
From a Latter-day Saint perspective, we would say that there's an eternal law that governs those things, and that in order to achieve the greatest good, which is eternal life, that we should refrain from doing those things, and we should do other things, right? Like, keep the commandments, whatever they may be for that time or that culture or that people. Help me understand by what standard for the 10, things, are there any, let me ask it like this. Are there any moral actions that are always wrong in your mind? Like, can you name even just one, and we can kind of go with that one?
So there's this kind of catchphrase and like atheistic jargon that I hate, but it's the only one I can think of right now. It's unnecessary harm.
Okay.
Now, unnecessary is a qualifier.
Yep.
So there's that, right? And I'm aware of that. So
and who gets to decide what's unnecessary, right? That's the issue.
Right. So that's the issue. But the thing is that the reason that annoys me is because I feel like most of the people who say that pretend like it's not a qualifier, and that's what bugs me the most. So
Sure.
I'll admit it's a qualifier, right? I'm making a leap. I think that how do I say this? I've always liked, it's always felt intuitively right to me, even though I can't quite argue my way out of it, that life, liberty, pursuit of happiness should be ranked in that order, that we should value them like that. So if something that I'm doing, and again, like society has to agree on this, and luckily society does. And by the way, if I could choose to live in a place that's set up by theistic like rules, the way that that the United States was, like I would prefer to live in that place than a place without any of this. I fully admit that there's something about being able to feel like you have the proof for human, you know what I mean? Because again, I can't prove it. You can't prove it, but it's more consistent with your argument to say, well, human beings have innate worth because we're valued. It's almost like we're the intersubjective value of God. Like God says, these things are valuable because I think they're valuable.
And that's kind of how I would view, like, if you have, I don't know if you have any children, but if you have a child, that you value that child because they're your child. Right.
And so I think it's a very intuitive argument, and I buy it wholesale, especially after having kids. Like 100%. Part of what makes this little person so valuable to me is that I just love him so much. You know what I mean? And so I think we could get into my construct of like the psychological God, because there's probably like we're probably laddering up and then and you know what I mean, and just seeing ourselves from that perspective, because we're complicated enough in our minds that we can do that. But what were we even talking about?
I'm still, no, this is good, and I think these conversations are destined to go off, different directions, but hopefully try to keep bringing it back. In regards to like morality. So let me let me try to I was gonna say straw man. Let me try to steel man.
Please do your best and straw man me.
No, let me try to steel man you. You're saying that there is no argument to determine on both sides, for me and for you, to objectively prove, maybe is the right word, what is moral and what is not. but that you would subscribe more so to a societal lens that depending on what's like the basketball game, right? Depending on what those basketball players decide or NBA decide or whoever's in charge,
right?
That's the scale by which morality is measured. Is that right?
Right. And the only change that I would make to that is in my example, I think it's the players going out and the players saying, we don't need the refs. We don't need the association. We know what we're aiming this game at. We know what we're trying to build here. We're trying to play. We're trying to have fun. We're trying to get better. All of this stuff. What you and I did coming into this, we said, these are our ground rules. This is what we're trying to accomplish. Can we bounce off of each other and do something within the rules that we've just established? Right. And it's determined by us. And so it's not a top-down thing. It's a we do this type of thing. That's the only change that I would make. Okay.
So for any theist or religious person watching this, the first critique they're going to have of that is, and we can just use the example that was already given. What about slavery, right? What about times in society where the strong majority did things at the expense of the minority?
Right.
Based on your model, that's the critique is based on that model, it would be considered moral. So you'd have to concede that slavery at one time was moral. Or if there's a tribe, out in Africa right now that's enslaving a few of its members for the betterment of the tribe, with that model, you'd have to say, yeah, like that's the game they're playing and that's what's moral. So how would you respond to that?
I think my best. Let me think about this one. Dead air. I think so. This is my. I mean, that's the showstopper question.
But that's why theists are like, I don't want to be an atheist because then I lose all my morality. Like it becomes 100% subjective.
But
which is their concern.
Yes. No, I absolutely agree with you. That's where the road ends. We all have to be trusting in one another. There has to be like some sort of guiding principle that we're living by that we've agreed on already doesn't allow for that. But of course, if we're the ones making the rules, then we can just agree that those aren't the rules, right? So, see, this is the thing about that question for me cuts both ways so hard because slavery is a part of every past, every culture's past, whether they were doing it because they thought that God was telling them to do it or not. It's something that theists who are watching this, you don't escape that question either. You know what I mean? You can't say like, well, God excused it for this reason. Like we both have to battle with that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes. I think
the Bible talks more about slave. You know what I mean? It's just like,
the pushback on that, like I said before, is I think that a Christian, and again, I'm not an expert on this, so I need to go brush up on it. But I think a Christian would say that the slavery in the Bible is not the same slavery that it's voluntary slavery is what they would call it. That's the argument I've heard. I don't know if you know Frank Turek. He's kind of a Christian apologetic on college campuses. That's how I've heard him say it. Is somebody, he's written a few books. He's a good guy, and I like a lot of stuff he does. But one of the pushback, because he does a Q&A session every time he goes to college campuses. He does a presentation and the Q&A. People will say, why does the Bible teach slavery? And he says, first of all, the slavery that you're talking about is not the slavery that you're referring to. Like we would say United States slavery in the early, founding of the United States. That was not voluntary. That was pushed upon them. So his argument for the Bible for Christians would be that they chose slavery to pay off their debt is the way that he would deal with that. So I don't know. And like I said, he may be wrong, and I can't verify that at the moment.
Right. I'm not a Bible scholar, and I don't think that I ever will be. So I would be interested in hearing somebody else's take on that, like listening to about 20 different people say what they think it is.
Sure.
The question still, for me, it still falls flat a little bit.
Even if it was true?
No. So
Okay.
the United States was a Christian nation, that like we brought that in. We thought that we even knowing that people are endowed by their rationale was always just like, well, but these aren't real people, they're 3/5 of a person or something like that. And so there's always going to be some way. Any motivated mind can believe anything that they want to believe and can convince themselves that something is moral. And we've had, we can look at some of the more radical religions that commit huge acts of terrorism, but the thing is, and so many of these debates, the atheist is like, you think this and you're okay with this. I don't think that that's the best version of your beliefs. I think that that's a bug that can happen when people go down that line of thought. Just like I think the majority of people, whether they think that there's a God or not, they don't want to enslave people. You know what I mean? I don't think that's the best case. I don't think that's the best steelman version of.
Right. Sure.
Although while it is present in my worldview, I guess it could happen the way that you described it. I think it's equally present as long as humans are involved. It's equally present for both of us.
I think that's fair.
I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think humans are. I didn't plan on quoting scripture, but in Doctrine and Covenants 121, Joseph is clear that when someone gets a little power, that, I'm paraphrasing, basically goes to his head, right? And he loses his authority, at least as far as Joseph is concerned in the eyes of God. I think that's true, right? What does he say? We've learned from sad experience that when a man gets a little power, basically he abuses it. And I think that goes for Latter-day Saints and atheists and everybody in between. I think the human species has a lot of issues when it comes to, how we deal with each other. Let's just say it like that.
Yeah, there's this thing that there's always this there's this gut reaction when an atheist. I don't really refer to myself that much as an atheist. It's easier in these terms to say I'm this and you're that, but there's this gut reaction. The reason that I wanted to talk to you about this, and I guess it's good that we're getting to this 47 minutes.
Yeah, that's gone so fast.
I can't believe it. There's this. So I put something on Reddit that just said hey, I've heard a million times. I've heard theists say atheists can't have objective morality.
Which subreddit did you post to, by the way?
The Ex-Mormon one.
Okay, yeah.
And I just said I've heard this a million times. What do you guys think about this? And I was surprised, although I shouldn't have been, at how many people were no, only atheists can have objective morality. And I'm that's just
really,
yeah. And I was that's just the gut reaction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I was part of the right team before, but now I'm part of the right team.
Sure.
And it took me years to be I don't think that there are teams. I don't think there are teams. And so but I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that, but I think it's interesting that visceral reaction to no, don't say that. I can only say that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are, on the Ex-Mormon subreddit, a lot of them are hurting. A lot of them,
yes.
There's a lot of hurt, whether that be real or perceived, it doesn't make a difference to them. A lot of people have, if we get to decide our level of hurt, they are very hurt based on interactions with members and bishops. So because I've posted on Ex-Mormon subreddit quite a few times, and sometimes I get some really good responses and people are really nice, and other times people just want to punch you bag, and I'm I'll be the punching bag. It's anonymous, so nobody knows who I am.
Right.
So anyway, it's kind of an interesting forum.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, that's a tricky one. We could talk about this for a second. The whole I don't actually want to talk about this, what's real and what's not real. It's too hard. I think if people feel that something, now this argument breaks down quickly, but I've never experienced life as anybody else. And so I only know how bad things have hurt me compared to other things that have hurt me. Right. So my only scale is my subjective thing. And yes, there are people who have been through much worse than me, and they probably, I mean, when my wife gave birth, it was like, you know, a 10, like on the pain level. And my 10 on the pain level is probably like when I broke my thumb when I was 18, right? But in no two worlds would I ever think that because both of them were rated as a 10, that they equal the same amount of pain. You know what I mean? But
if there is an objective scale, is what
right. Yeah. And so it's like there's a little bit like what I have to do with my worldview a little bit is I have to understand that like where I'm coming from can only correspond with what has ever been for me. And I have to kind of put myself in other people's shoes to try and build this algorithm of realness. You know what I mean?
Whereas to try to perceive what other people are feeling.
Exactly. And even though you believe that there is a more objective scale out there, practically you have to do the same thing in your own life because you don't have access to the same scale. And so I see people like you and me living very similar lives for those reasons. Like, was there a time when the whole world or most of the world, atheists and theists included, did they think that slavery was permissible? Probably. Was it? No. Can either of us,
depending on right? No, according to what and who,
right?
What time?
Yeah.
According to our time period, no, of course not. So I can see where you're coming from in regards to society, because our society, if you will, thought that slavery was okay in the past, and now it's not, right? And if there is no eternal cosmic justice, then and here's what I'll say in regards to those on the Ex-Mormon subreddit and in yourself. I think I actually mentioned this last time we talked in our previous conversation. I personally believe, and I think it's just always helpful to say it, if I had the exact same experiences as you, or if I had the exact same experiences with those on the Ex-Mormon subreddit, I probably do and say the same things that they are doing and saying, right? And so, because I just don't think it's helpful. Like one time I was teaching I was doing what do you call it? It was like not a sermon, but like I was like presenting to like 200 different people. It was youth in the church.
Okay.
And we were talking about the context of this is we were talking about not engaging in presentism or judging the past based on what we know today. Like, you know, whether it be slavery, whether it be, you know, the Nazi party, and something happened where that was the example I gave. I said, look, like, here's a picture of a Nazi soldier. Like, is it fair to judge him harshly, judge his character, say he's going to hell? Or, and my point was like, no, like, we don't know exactly what he went through. We don't know how he was raised. We can't really make a judgment based on what we know today and what we value today.
Right.
I had a boy raise his hand. He said, no, he was wrong. Or he said, yeah, we can, he said, we can judge him. And I said, okay, help me understand that. And he went on this ramble about how if he was born in as a Nazi, you know, he would have been the one to save the Jews. And I'm like, okay, you think very highly of yourself. Most likely, if you were born in Nazi Germany in the same circumstances as this soldier, you probably would have done similar things to what he has done. My point being that we can't judge too harshly or at all, because we don't really know and we can't really experience what other people have experienced. So I think Latter-day Saints struggle with that in regards to judgment and things like that. But I think our doctrine is clear: judge not. Right. So anyway,
right. So while you were talking, I think this is my answer now. If somebody says to this question right here, let's say you just asked me this question, right?
Okay. Yeah.
The people thought it was. That's my best answer. Now, do I think that it is? No. But they thought it was, right? But this is that like, we haven't lived as them. We don't know.
Sure. We can't really make a judgment.
We can't. I mean, yeah. Do I think it's wrong now? Yes. Would they think it was wrong now if they were living my life? Probably. You know what I mean?
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Yeah.
If this is a hypothetical, and I do like hypotheticals because I think they draw out the principles, and sometimes in the extreme. Let's say that tomorrow you woke up and 75% of the United States signed a document that said we need to enslave the 25% or the 99, so, pick your number, pick your poison. But
Right.
if the majority came out and said, we're going to do this and this is how our society is going to work, do you think you would go along with that and say, okay, if the majority says it, then it's moral and I'm going to go with it. I'm going to play this game. Or would you remove yourself, or would you fight against it? Or if so, on what grounds, by what standard would you judge that?
That's a good question. I would probably, here I am thinking highly of myself, right? Knowing what I know now, I think it's fair to say that how did this go one time? Trying to think of a quote that will answer what you're getting at, because I believe this. I think if you're interrupting somebody's path to what they believe their best life is by saying, no, sorry, you are this now. If you're obstructing the flow of where they've been, so I'm gonna ramble here for a second, but this is how I think. Anybody who's watched like one of my videos has probably gotten to a point. I feel like I somehow end up mentioning this in all of them. I think that, man, we should really talk again. I think that people have, now some people want to call it a Holy Spirit. Some people want to call it a ghost, or the light of, not a ghost, the Holy Ghost, or the light of Christ. But I call it a conscience. I think that, me personally, I have this voice that tells me like, this thing is what you want to aim at. And what I aim at for me is religion, or no, sorry. What I aim at, my highest goal, that's like the personified, that's my God. We'll call it that. So like what I want, the outcome of my life, I would hope that I spend all of my time doing things that are really, really good long-term. They make my family happy. They promote the well-being of my kids. They make my wife happy. That I'm pursuing that personified vision. That's God to me. And if you imagine that you type a direction into Google Maps and you tell your car or you go there, the map that you're following, the route, that's religion for me. The things that you have to do to get you to where you want to go, that's religion. And so, and I think that the end point, the thing that you want to arrive at, I think it chooses you more than you choose it. But it's very subjective. This is why I don't think that people can have objective moralities, because I think that what is right for me, if I'm like making this decision in pursuit of like what John Vervaeke would call like the divine logos, but I'm like, what if my life could justify itself? If I could live a life that was worth living for not just me, but the people who are going to come after me, what would that look like? And I aim at that, and then I follow this route, and I land there. And what I followed, and I followed this path. That was the religion that I lived. And if I were to suddenly hijack that for a group of people and say, this isn't your path anymore, now you're slaves for this other group of people, we're damning your progress, we're stopping you. I think that on those grounds, I would say that that's not acceptable, and that would be the wrong decision. Even though it's part of this, it's been agreed upon by this societal game that I think there has to be a lot of interplay there. I don't think that one scale is going to get it across the finish line. If you ask me, it's that whole like, I know my experience, and then I have to get to know you, and I have to gauge your experience, and then I have to figure out what the actual world is like based on me painting those things together. That's where it all falls apart as a person who thinks that it's subjective. The thing for me is, I think everybody has to live in a subjective world. I think if we think that we're living in an objective world, that's where it, like, we're lying to ourselves, and maybe not lying to ourselves on purpose, but
say that again. If we think we're living in a subjective world or objective?
No. If we think that there's an objective world, then it can be proven just as well as me saying there's a subjective world. We're always going to have our feet on the same ground. We always have to make claims based on the same. At the end of the, you know what I mean? We're living the same rules. We're disagreeing on the roads that we took to get there.
Yeah, I would say so. It's how about you think about this, and I'm obviously approaching this. That comment, you can take that off. You don't have to put that up there.
No, this is. I mean, this is the only person who's said anything. So
I don't think there's a winner or a loser here. I think we can both walk away from this conversation saying that there's a lot more to learn, and there's a lot more to take into account. And neither of us, I'm speaking for myself mostly, we're not experts on this. Like I haven't done all the reading that you have of the great philosophers, but here's what I will say. Would you agree that there is an objective world? Like our perception, I would agree, is subjective, right? We can't experience the world without it being subjective, right? And we can see that because people perceive things differently. But would you agree that there is a reality that is objective, even if we can't know it perfectly rationally? Is that
like, if you zoom way into a flower, does it have cells? Do those cells have mitochondria?
Yeah, do they actually exist?
Yes. If you zoom way down into a person, do they have cells? Do those cells determine, like, you know, I mean, the blood type that the person has?
Sure.
Everything, right?
There is objective truth, you would say.
Yes.
And I think with the caveat that, hey, we may be wrong, right? It's like Descartes' meditations that the only thing you can rationally know for sure is that you exist, right? I don't know if you would agree with that. I'm a subscriber to that on a rational level, in regards to our human entities, God aside, you really can't know anything. I think the word know becomes meaningless because you could be dreaming, you could be, you could have dementia, right? There's all these different reasons to why somebody would not be able to perceive the world accurately. And you never know if you're in that category.
Right.
That being said, right, and maybe our next conversation should be on epistemology, because I think talking about what we can actually know and the validity of knowing things, I think, is a really interesting, and it kind of bleeds into what we're talking about. How can we know the cosmic scale of morality, if there is one or if there isn't one? Right. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm thinking about. I do have, well, I don't know. Where do you want to take it? I have a couple more questions that we could go down, but we're an hour over, or 2 minutes over an hour.
How about, do you want to go to 110? We can give ourselves like another 8 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine. It's okay if did you want to go somewhere specifically? I don't care.
No, I didn't have a specific spot.
Okay. So my concern, again, and I'm approaching this to see how we can maybe strengthen your argument here. The concern from a Latter-day Saint or Christian probably is that, and you've heard this before, is that an atheist cannot justify their morality. That's typically the phrase that's used, that they can be moral and they can act morally, but when you ask them, why is it moral or why is it not? And just to be frank here, I think that we're seeing that a little bit with what you're saying, because at first you're kind of saying, the basketball players decide what is good. Right. But then when I ask you about the hypothetical of if you woke up in an America where slavery was back, does that make it good? And you didn't really say, well, yeah, which would agree with your first one. So which one is it? Do you? And you said unnecessary harm. So it sounds like it's more complicated than just society gets to decide, because sounds like you don't always think that is the case, but a theist would say, well, why? And explain that to me. And they would push you and push you and push you until, you can't. But I mean, we could go both ways. But I don't know. Tell me how you feel about that. Could you feel like you can justify morality, or is it, if you say it is subjective, is that kind of the end all be all?
I think the most honest thing I can say is that I think it's subjective. I think that there are principles that shouldn't be crossed, right? In the same way that you think there are principles that shouldn't be crossed. The difference is you're saying that based on the authority of a being,
Yes.
that nobody can prove exists. And I'm
Sure.
just saying outright, look, I can't prove this, but this like I personally think so. I think that Christian God is kind of like the personification of what's best for society. I think that
Mhm.
that's what the Christian God is. I think we thought of a way to kind of cudgel people into thinking like these are the rules that you will live by. Otherwise, like this won't. In the same way that we use Santa Claus on little kids, although
Yeah.
I don't say that with disrespect. But in the same way that we're using Santa Claus for little kids, we're saying these are the rules that you have to follow. You have this judge who lives in the sky, and he won't give you presents if you don't listen, right? If you don't do what you're supposed to do. And he has a list, and he's checking it twice and all that stuff, right?
Sure.
And so what I'm doing is I'm saying, look, I'm ignorant. I don't know that there is a thing up there. I think that these are the principles that we should live by. Whereas, and I think that this is a difference for kind of to I don't know, to oversimplify things again for unnecessarily. But I think that from my experience, atheists, when the answer is I don't know, will just say I don't know. And I find a lot of Christians or theists who say, well, I don't know, but it must be this thing. You know what I mean? So it's kind of that argument from ignorance, the God of the gaps fallacy, where so I could push you on all the same things. And I think so JC, I would love to hear your take on this. But I think that really you and I are making the same argument. There are principles that we don't think we should cross. I'm saying I can't justify why they exist. And you say I can't justify it, but this guy who I think exists can.
I would kind of, well, tell me if you agree with this. Like I said, and I want to go back and redefine. So JC in the chat is saying morality can be independent of God. I would ask them if they mean objective or subjective morality.
Yeah.
Because I think you and I agree. And I would say
yeah.
if I was an atheist, I would basically repeat exactly what you've said tonight. I think I would have to go that route,
right?
To be consistent, and it can be hard, and there's more intricacies in know, in the details. But that being said, when I say objective, all I mean, I don't mean that I can prove it. I mean that I am pointing to something outside of the human species. That's what I mean by objective.
You're saying there's a third party who can verify.
Yes. Well, you mean third party, like between you and I and another one? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Or what do you mean third party?
I mean, so you're saying there's something outside of human experience. There's like something outside of the human mind. So there's because you always want a third party verification of something, like a trustworthy third party, like, hey, this guy was there, he saw it, you know what I mean? And and what the sense that I get is that for you, you're saying that because there's that this comes from outside of the human mind, that makes it objective because we're all approaching it in the same way that we're approaching the objective world.
That's yes, kind of. Yeah. As long as I can be clear that I'm saying that from an atheist point of view, I think we're required to say it's subjective because there is nothing outside of it. And I'd be curious. JC is kind of saying the opposite, which I'd love to see what they're saying. But
JC, we're both curious about what you're saying here.
But
objective
I would
being
say,
outside your own consciousness.
Yeah, and I'd like to know by what scale, Ryan? What's the scale by which, and can it be objective or is it just opinion?
Right.
The claim of theism, of Latter-day Saintism, is that there is an objective standard that doesn't change based on our feelings. And kind of what I hear you saying is the opposite, that no, morality is based on our feelings. It is based. And you can shoot that back at us and say, we can't know that objective standard because we have to view it through our subjective lens, which I can understand that argument as well.
Yeah. No. So what's interesting to me is, I was listening to a podcast once on the differences between like Christianity and Islam. And the person who was talking was just saying like, essentially that Christianity has been through more reformations which has made it more culturally palatable across the world. Like Christianity used to be very similar in its most extreme branches to the most extreme branches of Islam that we see today. But those kinks kind of got worked out a little bit. And so both me, most of society governing the laws of religion. So I don't think, you know what I mean? So the problem is all over the place. And of course, human beings being subjective creatures, like we're always gonna, like this debate is always gonna come down to just, it's interestingly wrong. We're both interestingly wrong a little bit. But at least it's interesting, right?
Yeah. And I feel like we both have to admit, at least on a rational level, that both of us could be wrong. I talk to a lot of Christians who say, no, I cannot be wrong about this. And I say, to be consistent and to be at least humble a little bit in your take, I think all of us can say, hey, we could be wrong on this. And if we are, let's try to learn more. And that's kind of what these conversations are, I think, is working off each other. And by the way, I really appreciated this. I know we hit our 10-minute mark, but I just want to say how much I appreciate you. Like, you seem like an awesome guy. You don't seem like someone who browses the Ex-Mormon subreddit. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just joking, but I really do. And I'd love to do this again. And I realize that not all your content can just be you and I talking on your channel, but
we got to do it more though. I've definitely had fun. Is there something you want to plug? Do you have a thing? I know you work with Jacob.
Yeah, you can put in his thoughtful faith. So he actually does. You actually might like this, and I think you would resonate more. We didn't go into it, and I didn't go into it because I'm not 100% on board with him. But he has a 4-part series on what is morality, and he kind of agrees with what you're saying in regards to morality is the scale, even for an atheist, greatest well-being and greatest suffering. And our choices are moral or not, depending on which we're going to. So anyway, for those watching and for you, sorry, remind me your name. I don't even know what to call you.
It's Cody.
Okay, Cody.
I go by Uber Mormon mostly on here because it's a good joke, but
so if you, Cody, if you're interested, thoughtful faith, if you just search that LDS on YouTube, you'll pop. It's like a blue icon.
Yeah, no, I've browsed his stuff before. I've commented on a bunch of his videos of him and Forrest talking.
Okay, those are good.
I like those a lot. That's what I kind of wanted to model this after a little bit. There's something that you might like. Well, 2 things that you might like. So if you know who John Vervaeke is, he's doing a series called After Socrates.
Okay.
And he's kind of trying to, he considers himself to be a non-theist. A
non-theist, not an atheist.
A non-theist, yeah. And just to add more confusion to the fire, I would call myself a post-theist. Which is, it's technicalities. But he had, so his After Socrates series is interesting because he's kind of trying to, the way that I heard it described, and I really like this description, was math is the most powerful form of abstract thinking that we have because everybody just agrees on the rules. We all agree. And so what he's trying to do is he's trying to build something that we can all agree on as far as meaning and morality. And so it's really interesting. But Chris Hanna over at Porchtime is doing he's just doing he'll watch 3 episodes with a couple guests and then they'll summarize it for an hour. So and those are interesting as well. So check out Porchtime is doing the After Socrates series. But I am going to end this. Don't leave the studio. I'm just going to end the broadcast.
The after show.
Yeah, the after show. We're going to get crazy. No, we're not. But no, so thank you everybody for watching. I'm going to fix all the grammatical and spelling errors in the title very soon, but thank you for being here. And I had fun. So
thank you.